Hello everyone, it's Monday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Po-kyung. Just a few days after President Yoon Suk Yeol made the decision that the Korean victims of Japanese wartime forced labor will be compensated by the Korean government and without any contributions from the Japanese firms responsible, he held a summit with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida in Tokyo in March. Now, Kishida in return visited Seoul on Sunday, marking the full-scale resumption of so-called shuttle diplomacy, or should we say regular mutual visits. What was mainly discussed at the summit, and what are the implications of the agreements the two leaders made? For this, we have Choi Eunmi, Research Fellow at Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Dr. Choi, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me today.
And we also have Professor Hironori Sasada at Hokkaido University. Welcome to the show, Professor.
Well, thank you for having me.
All right, Dr. Choi, first question to you. The Japanese Prime Minister Kishida's visit to Seoul, it certainly is highly symbolic in that it marks the resumption of a more direct form of diplomacy between South Korea and Japan. Now, overall, how significant is this visit, and what do you believe made Kishida make up his mind to come to Seoul just over 50 days after the summit in Tokyo?
Well, first of all, I would like to welcome his visit to Korea just 52 days after President Yoon's visit to Tokyo. With this visit, we can say shuttle diplomacy between Korea and Japan has been restored. For 12 years, we couldn't have a normal summit meeting between two countries. In that meaning, I think it was meaningful stuff for the countries, even though we couldn't solve all of the difficult problems between two countries. Then we have a question. What makes Prime Minister Kishida's visit to Korea? I would like to point out three reasons. First one is the Korea-Japan bilateral relations. Even though Japanese side asserts that the first labor problem is over in 1965, but nobody can deny that what Japan has been for the improvement for Korea-Japan relations. So it must be a kind of pressure for Japan. So maybe Prime Minister Kishida has a kind of thinking that he has to do something for Korea and Korea-Japan relation. And second reason is the domestic matter. These days, Prime Minister Kishida's approval rate is pretty high. It's over 50%. So we are thinking when he dissolved of the House of Representatives, but we are not sure that when it's going to be happened. But if once he dissolved the House of Representatives, then it's very difficult to move from outside, especially in the meaning of in the context of Korea-Japan relations. So it's better for him to move right now, not later. Maybe the third reason is the United States. We wonder why Japan decided to visit Korea before G7. Then we can maybe predict, maybe there was a trilateral summit meeting between Korea, Japan, and the United States. And then it's a kind of a step for the trilateral cooperation. So for Japan, they kind of efforts for the Korea-Japan relations, which is called the weakest line between the three relations.
Right, I see. So those were the reasons that led Prime Minister Fumio Kishida to make up his mind to visit Seoul. Now, Professor Sasada, delving into specifics for security, South Korea and Japan agreed to strengthen trilateral security cooperation, while measures are already underway to implement the agreement the U.S., Japan, and South Korea made last November on real-time information sharing over North Korea's missile threats. How are both South Korea and Japan viewing North Korea's threat, and what does this real-time data sharing mean?
Yeah, North Korean threat is extremely serious for both Japan and South Korea, and there's no doubt about that. And data sharing is crucial as well because the biggest threat from North Korea is missile attack, and you need to detect and respond to incoming missiles should they be launched against us. Data sharing is indispensable for this kind of operation. However, I'd like to make a point that it is worth noting that for Japan, threat from China and Russia are more concerning and imminent, and that is what the Japanese government has been spending most resources for, and Japanese media is focusing nowadays. So there is slight differences between Japan and South Korea in their security priority, and that needs to be discussed among the two countries, and they will have to find ways to effectively cooperate with each other.
Right, I see. Now, Dr. Choi, President Yoon said during a Q&A session yesterday that he does not rule out Japan's future participation in the Washington Declaration. What does this hint, and what possible measures could we see regarding Washington's extended deterrence and trilateral cooperation with Japan?
Well, to be honest, I got a lot of questions because of these comments today. But I think that the NCG, nuclear consultative group between Korea and the United States, is meaningful when it is existed as a bilateral relations. This is a point from the Korean government asserted until now. So I don't think, or maybe the Japanese side come to the NCG and we have got any kind of a trilateral consultative. We make any kind of a trilateral consultative group, especially the NCG. Is not at this point. It's too early to mention, but we have a kind of a trilateral cooperation in many aspects between three countries. So it's, especially if we mentioned the real-time exchange, information sharing is very important things of three countries. So even though I want to say that even though it's very early to talk about Japan's participation in the NCG, but we can we will see the how much it is going to be fast the real-time information sharing is.
Right, I see. Now, Professor Sasada, moving on to the economic front here. Seoul and Tokyo agreed to stabilize the chip supply chain through cooperation between Korea's chip manufacturing businesses and Japan's chip materials, parts, and equipment companies. And they are to plan joint research on aerospace, quantum, AI, and so on. How important is it to have such close cooperation in the high-tech sector right now?
Yeah, the significance of that is that it is a part of global effort to respond to the possible economic coercion and building of a economic bloc by China. Japan and the United States are trying to secure supply chains of themselves and allies by reducing their dependence on China. So they expect South Korea to take part in the effort for stabilizing supply of chips, parts, and equipment. And once again, there seems to be a disparity between Japan and South Korea on this issue too. Japan wants South Korea to take tougher stance against China and make stronger commitment for this cause.
Right, I see. So it is significant in a way that reduces the dependence on China, but there is disparity there. Now, let's tap on the issue of the discharge of wastewater from Fukushima nuclear power plant. Dr. Choi, both leaders agreed to allow a group of South Korean experts to visit Japan to inspect the radioactive water. Could we say Japan is giving a sort of a concessions regarding this matter by giving South Korea room to express its own concerns?
Well, about the Fukushima matter, we all know that, especially from the Japanese side, know what the Korean people has a lot of concern about this problem. So I guess they might think they have to do something for the Korean people and the Korea-Japan relations. So I think the things that Japan agreed to allow a group of South Korean experts to visit Japan for the Fukushima matter is really good signal and for good for two countries. And I think it's a kind of exceptional treatment from Japanese side because it's a kind of risky. I mean that if another country, for example, China or other countries who has a concern of the Fukushima matter, if they want to visit Korea, visit Japan, and they want to see and inspect the Fukushima, near Fukushima, and if they want to visit Japan and look around the other many things about Fukushima things, then there is no answer from Japan to deny their proposal or their request because they already give any as a kind of treatment to Korea exceptionally. Then they need to do something for the other countries who has the same concern to the Japan and the Fukushima nuclear power plant. So I think it's a really good signal and it's a really good treatment from Japan to South Korea. But I'm not sure that if the Japan is Japan allow a group of the South Korean experts to visit Japan for because of the Fukushima matter, then we see and inspect a kind of things in near the Fukushima. But if we are doing the kind of things, then I'm not sure how much the South Korean people I can say that really relieve our concern, or we can accept the Fukushima things to South Korea Japan relations.
Right. So it is really interesting to. Yeah, it is really interesting to hear that this is an exceptional treatment for South Korea regarding this matter. Like our Dr. Choi said, Professor Sasada, there is some kind of worries or concerns that if this matter really is going to, South Korea's assessment of this matter is really going to be taken into consideration by Japanese government. Professor Sasada, what is your thoughts on this?
Yeah. It is quite likely that the Japanese government will make an opportunity to hear South Korean experts' assessment before making the decision. And like Dr. Choi said, this is the concession made by the Japanese government or the goodwill. And I'm glad that the government did that. And I assume that two leaders have already discussed arrangement of this kind to be made before the decisions to be delivered. However, what determines government's final decision concerning the issue would be IAEA's final report. When the international organization says it is below the safety regulation level, there's nothing to prevent Japan from releasing the water, technically speaking.
Right. Now, Dr. Choi, let's move on to our past history. Kishida said the Japanese government's commitment to inheriting past administrations' positions on history is unwavering. He also added that his heart aches for Korean people who suffered due to wartime forced labor, though he did point out that these are his personal feelings. How did you see Kishida's words?
Well, first, I would like to say that from the Koreans' general perspective, it's not enough for his mention, because even though he mentioned his personal feelings, the heartbreaking or heart aches for Korean people who suffered due to the wartime forced labors, but he didn't mention his apology or self-reflection or kind of things, or his Japan's responsibility for this matter. But personally, as a Japan expert and who is looking at the Japanese politics and Prime Minister Kishida's leadership style, I think personally, Prime Minister Kishida did his best. When we think about his political position and the political climate in Japan, it's very difficult to mention Japanese apology or responsibility, especially in the legal responsibility for the Korean people who who suffered from the past. I mean, especially for the forced labor issues. So I think even though it's not enough for the Koreans, general people. I guess it's a really meaningful step for Korea-Japan relations. And then I hope, even though he didn't mention Japanese apology or self-reflection to Korean people, but I hope his action or other things between Korea and Japan, especially in the historic part is going to be better. And it may be our next steps and what we have to do next.
Right, I see. So though it could be not enough for South Korean public to receive, our Dr. Choi is saying that she personally thinks, considering Kishida's style of his politics, this significantly shows us that he did put his efforts to appease the South Korean public. Right. Now, Professor Sasada, the so-called future partnership funds, which is part of efforts to compensate victims of wartime forced labor, is at the final stage of establishment. Now, is there still a chance that the two Japanese companies ordered by the Korean Supreme Court in 2018 to compensate will contribute?
I think it is highly unlikely for the companies to take part in compensation. Both governments have agreed to settle the issue through the foundation, and I do not think Prime Minister Kishida would make further concession on this matter, which is so much harder to do comparing with security or economic issues that we discussed earlier. As Dr. Choi explained very well, his hands are tied so strictly by domestic political conditions. And he has made his best, which was to express his empathy, and that was the best he could do at this condition. And also, I suppose the companies are strictly instructed by the Japanese government not to make decisions independently. So the company's hands are tied as well.
Right, interesting. Now, Professor, shifting gears a little bit here, noting that exchanges between future generations are critical, the two leaders agreed to discuss ways to boost people-to-people exchanges by, for example, recovering the number of flights and fully resuming the youth exchange program, which is called Genesis. Now, how important is this boost to people-to-people exchanges?
Yes, this is certainly important, and such exchange would encourage young people from both countries to build personal ties and deep understanding of the other country without prejudice or stereotype. And such personal experiences would last a long time and become a foundation for cooperation in the future. And so I cannot stress enough how important this is. Much like President Yoon's experiences of visiting Japan when he was young, these kind of experiences will become important in the future. And also, I'd like to make a point that it is also critical that older generations should not try to influence or manipulate young people based on their political beliefs or ideology. We should let young people freely exchange with each other and learn from each other, and hopefully build a better future for us.
Right, I cannot agree more. Now, Dr. Choi, at the upcoming G7 summit in Hiroshima, both leaders said they would visit the monument for Korean victims of the atomic bombing. Now, among those victims, as far as I know, victors of wartime forced labor are also included. Given that, how significant could we say such a visit to monument would be?
Well, actually, that was the only thing that I can't predict as a result of the summit meeting, because the thing, the visit to the monument for Korean victims of atomic bombing is very difficult because, as you mentioned, there are a lot of wartime forced labor included in it. So, there are a lot of victims are actually wartime forced laborers. So many people, including me, think that it's very, it may be impossible because when we think about the position, Japanese position of the wartime forced labor issues. But I think it's very meaningful step for the improvement of Korea-Japan relations, and then how the Prime Minister Kishida think about the history problems. Even though some people say that it's the Japanese very how can I say the strategy for justifying as a position of victims. I mean, because in the perspective in terms of atomic bombing, Japan is a victim, but they didn't explain well why the big atomic bombing was happened in Hiroshima or Nagasaki. So some people are mentioned that it's just the Japanese very how is it bad intention, but I don't want to think like that. Even though what is the intention it is, and then even though the intention of both sides is different, but to go to visit monuments as Korean president and Korea's president and the Japanese prime minister go together and show some kind of respect or some express their feeling to the people. I mean, who has a very hard time at the time, hard experience at the time is very important. So I think it's very important stuff for two countries.
Right, I see your point. Now, we are running out of time, but I'd like to ask this question, Dr. Choi. More direct diplomacy has resumed, but what's more important now is that it continues, right? For improved bilateral ties to continue and become a basic foundation with tangible results for people. What would be a key point to keep in mind for both governments? Could you briefly tell us?
Yeah, if I just mention just one thing is just time. I mean, the Prime Minister Kishida's visit was happened just 52 days later. After President Yoon's visit to Tokyo. So I think we have to keep in mind that the moment is very important and how much the two leaders' will and intention is strong for improving Korea-Japan relations. So I hope two countries, I mean the two governments, will keep in mind this and then going on together.
Right, we do need to focus on goodwill. Now, I'd like to ask more questions, but unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. But thank you, Dr. Choi and Professor Sasada, for your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.